Yes, God takes broken people and makes them whole. I think we just sang that, and it's so true. As Wayne said, last Saturday night was our men's retreat. It's the 5th time I've gone, and every time I come back, I need to take a couple of days just to kind of come down. It's such an exciting time. We had 16 there, and we all shared. And a lot of people think, well, that's the evening service, and they're broken. And we talked about their recovery from alcoholism, drug addiction. Many of you know me. You hear me most Sundays. I'm sorry for that. But we all have to do what we have to do. But a lot of you really don't know me. And for many years, many years, I really struggled with an addiction, a gambling addiction. And I was the kind of guy, I would always be sitting near the ATM just in case. Because you didn't want to give up your stall or your machine, of course. And several nights I'd come away considerably less in the pocket because, of course, you never win. But it took me years to find that out. But nonetheless, I just entered retirement. A wonderful journey of someone's life. But it's probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And there's a lot of gray hairs and no hairs here, so I know you know what I mean. The first year after retirement is quite a thud. Going from something like $160,000 or so a year to $800 a month is a bit of a kick in the pants, you might say. Especially, I'd been a consultant for the last, 48 years of my life. And consultants make good money. And when you're working, times are good, and you develop quite a high standard of living. But when you're not working, or as they say in the industry, you're between gigs, life is a bit of a struggle, and you use your credit cards. Actually, you got quite good at using credit cards. And debt becomes another addiction. The kind of debt that I incurred was the kind that I would go into a shopping center and I would go store to store and I would see things that people that I knew would absolutely love to have an item or two. And so I would pick up things. I'd pay for them, of course, but I would pick them up. And then I would give them to friends and acquaintances. And because I had this outpouring of love, the Spirit worked so deeply in me, even in those days. Wouldn't always pay or buy things for myself, but a good friend of a lot of us, John Burrill, once told me that he knew of nobody that had more altruism in him than I did, to a fault, it turned out. So I retired, basically, with a condo and $800 a month, realizing that Calgary was way too high or very expensive place to live. And so I moved to BC, a lot of you know that. Moved to Penticton for 4 months. And within a month of being in Penticton, I realized that what God had said to me that I needed to retire and enjoy retirement. I had retired, but I wasn't enjoying retirement. Not only was I not enjoying it, it was not sustainable. So in the last 6 months, I've probably lost the better part of $600,000 from failed condos and from walking away from condos. But what a cheap price to pay to find the Lord. Now, He's always walked with me. He's always been there. He's provided. He's cared. He's been a part of my life. My spirituality, I dare say, is stronger than it's ever been. This is my family. And yes, it's so grateful for the ongoing opportunity to serve, to work at the church, volunteer at the church. And I'm certainly no stranger here to anybody. But it's not possible if you're not focused on one thing. That one thing is Christ. All the things that I worked for 48 years mean nothing because I don't have them. You can get on Isaiah's pity pot and say, woe is me, like I deserve better than this. No, I don't. I deserve Christ. And that's where my heart is. I worked all those years, and you can say, well, for nothing. Like, why would you not be upset? Not upset in the least. I've never been happier. Peter Ralph asked me about a month ago, I don't think Peter's here today, I haven't seen him, but he asked me, how are you doing? Not how are you, but how are you doing? And I said, Peter, I have never been happier in my life with so little in my jeans. That day I had 51 cents in the bank and 75 cents in my jeans, and I thought I was a rich man because I have Christ in my heart. Cast your eyes on his face, and all the worldly things will fall away, right? The kind of things that we share at the camp, they're real life stories because we're real people, whether we're the morning service or the evening service. He's always been there for me. He's always cared for me. He's protected me. I'm so thankful to have him in my life. The story today about the pigs, we should never, or the demonic, how do I follow that? The fellow that had his demons cast out, Jesus called on him to tell his testimony, just what I'm doing. We all have a story, and we should not be afraid or ashamed to share it, because to the glory of God, here we are. Thank you.
Wow. That's what it's all about around here, is transform lives, right? The power of Christ to transform lives. And we experience it ongoing here. Last Saturday night, I was sitting around the fire with the guys, and Bill shared, and different ones shared. Some who were just brand new with us and new in the faith. One of them who had such a powerful touch of God, just a young guy, and the guys reached out to him last week, and he's just a newcomer in recovery and has been through hell and back. And the guys just reached out to him and loved him and embraced him. And here I found out that along with a couple of other new folks, there's 8 of them right now that are in David's pathway to freedom. And this young fella's there. He's serious, right? An intensive journey this weekend, Friday night, all day Saturday and Sunday, through the 12 steps and dealing with ego. And so as we're sitting around the fire and people are sharing, Bill had already opened my heart as he shared. And then one of the fellas that some of you would know, and I'm not going to mention any names, but he was up here last Sunday night and said, Pastor Wayne was talking about me. And last year at the men's retreat, I'd forgotten until, I don't know how I could forget it, but I'd forgotten that he shared that if he hadn't have been at the men's retreat, he would be dead because he was going to commit suicide that weekend. That was last year, a year ago last weekend. He was going to commit suicide. And a couple of our guys got around him and said, you got to come to the retreat. And, well, I don't have any money. I can't pay to go to it. And they said, well, we've got money. People have donated so that you can come. And off the streets, out of a horrendous background, he came and he gave his life to Christ, right? His whole life has been turned around. So last Saturday night, a week ago last Saturday night, he was sharing with us how I wouldn't be here if I hadn't have been here last year and I hadn't have listened to you guys proclaiming the good news, sharing the good news, right? That's what this passage is really all about. See, we'll never begin to understand this story of the demoniac unless we realize that whatever we think about demons, they were intensely real to these people and to the man whose mind was deranged. This man was a case of violent insanity. He was too dangerous to live among people. And he lived amidst the tombs. He was naked. He was homeless. And he lived in a cemetery. And this was a cemetery that everybody avoided. There had to be another one on the other side of town, folks. They didn't want to go near this place because they knew he was there. And there were others who were thought to have demons as well. In fact, in one of the other Gospels, it talks about the fact that there were actually two of them that were cursing Jesus and yelling at Jesus. He was just too dangerous to live among people, and so he lived amidst the tombs, which were believed to be the home and the haunt of demons. We can note the sheer courage of Jesus in dealing with them, and why does that not surprise us? The man had a maniacal strength which enabled him to snap his fetters, his chains, like the picture behind me. His fellow men were so terrified of him, they would never try to do anything for him. But Jesus faced him, calm and unafraid. Some of us in our ministry have been confronted in situations very similar to this, where we've seen this power that comes over people in their insanity and in their struggle in life. All the demons that Jesus confronts have three things in common. First of all, they cause self-destructive behavior in the victim. The victim feels trapped in that condition, and they separate the victim from normal living in a family circle. They're not able to be with their family. Now, a lot of us who work with addiction here, and we have some of you are here, and you're just your guests, and we're so glad you're here. We have a very strong addiction recovery ministry here, and programs going on every day of the week here to help people. And we see it up front and personal. And we see people who seem to be demon-possessed, and really, in this sense, they certainly are. And so these addictions that people struggle with, these problems with mental health, separate people from families and from their friends. And this sounds very familiar to us. Don't many of us suffer from the same kind of snares and burdens? If we define demons as those forces which have captured us and prevented us from becoming what God intends us to be, we are as surrounded by, yes, possessed by, as many demons as those whom Jesus encountered. Our demons can be of many kinds. Mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, paranoia. It can be addictions, obsessions, destructive habits, and so on. The similarities between this demon-possessed man and the demons that possess us is quite amazing. He was totally cut off from his family and from society. And we've seen it over and over again where people, because of their addictions and those struggles, are not able to be around their family. And their family has to hold them at arm's length. Can't even allow them in the door, because when they come around, things disappear. And in our recovery ministry, we often ask the question, how do you know when an addict or an alcoholic is lying? And people say, how do you know? Their lips are moving, right? Harsh, I know, but true. It's true. And so we know that people end up being separated from their families. Hopefully not to this extreme, for he didn't live as people, but in the tombs, probably in caves that were used as burying places. He was also driven by the demon into the wilds, it says. In other words, he was already in a living death, separated from what we would call normal people and normal living. Furthermore, the demons were harming him. In Mark's version, it says he was bruising himself with stones. He was cutting himself. Some of you may know of that addiction, of that problem. I remember one of our gals here. It's just the most beautiful gal, coming out of an abusive background, but yet having a loving family that had adopted her, and it looked like things were going to be good. She got into this addiction of cutting herself. No matter how beautiful she was, inside she didn't see herself as that beautiful person that God had created her to be. And we all tried to help her. We all tried to help her. And she fell in love, and this wonderful fellow married her, and he was going to help her. And then, of course, she had never really dealt with this addiction, right, with this problem. And she kept on cutting herself, and they had to move away from this area. And so I don't know what has happened. I've thought of her many times and prayed for her. She'd been in our home, and just the most loving person. But you see, she didn't see herself the way that we all saw her, as this beautiful person that God created, right? So in Mark's version, no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. Fourthly, and I think most sadly, he was so totally possessed that though the demons recognized Jesus as the Son of the Most High God, this man could not free himself, right? He could not free himself. And the point of the story then, as well as all the demon healing stories in the Gospels, is that the power of God can cast out demons, all of our demons, right? The power of God, as Bill spoke of, right? Having no money in your jeans, no money in the bank, and yet having more peace than I've ever experienced, right? What a testimony, Bill, to the power of God's love. That's the power that we need at work in our lives. For many times, the very demon that holds us in bondage is that negative attitude that we've talked about here. I don't know if there's a greater addiction than negative thinking, right? Because it's that negative thinking that binds us, that clings to us. It's almost like a straitjacket in the way that we live our lives. And Jesus has come to set us free from that straitjacket. So the point of the story then, as well as all the demon healing stories in the Gospels, is that the power of God through Jesus Christ can cast out all demons. The 70 persons that were sent out by Jesus soon afterwards came back and reported, no doubt with astonishment, "Lord, in your name, even the demons submit to us." Now, this is really the key to the power of Alcoholics Anonymous, which we talk about a lot around this church. This is the key to success. Those 12 steps to healing begin with these 3 steps. Number 1, we admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. Number 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And number 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. You know, alcoholism is such a terrible problem here and in North America, but it's unbelievably heartbreaking in the former Soviet Union. It's just unbelievable there. Before the collapse of the USSR in 1989, Soviet officials appealed to American AA members to help them set up AA in Russia and in the Soviet Union. However, because the Soviet Union was officially atheistic, they asked that these 3 steps that I just shared with you be omitted in adapting AA to them. The American AA, of course, stating that those 3 steps are basic to the program. We need God to free us from our demons. See, there's so many different rehab programs that you hear about. They're advertised on TV, some of them. And they tell you, this is not a 12-step program. And of course, the main reason they want to tell you this is not a 12-step program is because it doesn't involve these 3 first steps. We can get you clean and sober, but you don't need God. You don't need God. We did a study years ago, and I remember Bill Crossan got these statistics put together, and it was about how the folks that make it in AA, in recovery, the numbers, the percentage, is in direct correlation with how many of them make a spiritual connection, right? Folks, it isn't possible without God. Otherwise, you're kind of like that poor cat hanging by its claws on the wall, right? That's how you live your life. That's not sobriety, right? And so they knew that, and they tried so hard. Now, I had the privilege, thanks to this church, years ago, after the Berlin Wall came down in '89, in '92, with the support of this church and ministry, I went with a team to Kazakhstan and to Russia. And we took, paid for by many of you in the congregation, many who have gone on now, medical supplies to hospitals. We took a boatload of Bibles over to distribute, and doors opened for us in Kazakhstan and Russia. And I had the privilege of preaching all over and of helping start new congregations in Russia and in Kazakhstan, in Moscow. And while I was over there, I did street preaching. Now, I've done things like that before, but boy, I'll tell you what, this was really radical. Because we would go out on the street, and amidst all of these people, hundreds and hundreds of people walking around in the parks and everywhere. And I'd already noticed, I said to one of the guys, I said, you notice how many of these people are staggering? And they said, yeah, I've noticed that too. And you get close to them, or they come up and they get in your face when you're talking to them, and they just reeked of vodka. And I would go walking from the hotel. I'd get up early in the morning and go out and walk and pray and be walking around. And people were staggering on the streets at 6 o'clock in the morning. They were so drunk, right? Now, some of them had just started. They had little shops on corners where they could buy vodka. You'd buy a coffee, they'd buy a vodka, right? It was so sad to see it. And I remember preaching and sharing Christ, and I had a translator that was translating for me. And all these drunks would come. Now, I'd had drunks go after me before, but this was unbelievable. They really came at you, you know, and told you to shut up, you know, and we don't want to hear, you know, this kind of stuff. And fortunately, the translators didn't translate to me what they were saying. And I didn't understand Russian, so I was okay. I just kept on preaching. I just kept on proclaiming, Bill, right? Just kept on proclaiming. So members of AA realize that they not only need God's help, but the support of people around them. In almost all of Jesus' stories of healing, there is restoration to families and townspeople. For the healing of demons today, the fellowship of family, congregation, and community is a key to restoration. Becoming free from our demons is seldom a do-it-yourself project, right? This is not self-help, right? This is not a self-help program. We need help. We need God's help. And because God is a God of love, unconditional love, acceptance and forgiveness, because God is a God of grace and mercy and peace and joy, God is right there. Jesus says, "Come unto me, all that are burdened down, all that are carrying this load," whatever the load is, whatever the chains are that are binding you, that are holding you down, I can set you free. Wow. That's the freedom that we need in our lives. The real source of freedom from the evil and pain and trauma and injustice that binds people in our world today is the power of God's kingdom at work among us and through us. That's the power that we need to set us free. Wow. That's the impact of a soul set free. Bless you.